Mushrooms are another common suggestion we hear about. The late Terence McKenna proposed that the forbidden fruit was a reference to a psychotropic plant and fungi, or mushrooms, specifically psilocybin mushrooms. Another option is the fig, as it was from fig leaves that the garments for Adam and Eve were made. So which do you think it is? What was the forbidden fruit on the tree?
Let us assume for a moment that we are seeking to discover the axis or the central theme of the Atlantean culture. What was the great religious symbol among the Atlanteans? To them, the serpent was the symbol of God. Irish people claim that the first teachers of their race came not from the east, from Europe, but from the west, and that ancient robed priests came out of the ocean on the west coast of Ireland, and that these were the ones who instructed them. The Irish have a considerable folklore dealing with Atlantis. There is also a great deal of lore relating to this in the Spanish area and in Portugal. And of course, what is left of North Africa bears testimony to the same basic accounts. The symbols always of the ancient initiate kings, the symbols of the secret masters of magic in ancient times. And it is believed that by this, the Druids, who received it also, and used it twisted as a serpent symbol around the Orphic egg, that among these ancient peoples, this symbol had to do with the magnetic field of the earth. To them, the serpent was the symbol of pure light. To them, it was also the symbol of energy and of power, and the control of power and the directing of energy seems to have had something to do with the rising wisdom of the old Atlantean savants or priests.
We got the base from the east and the west. That's where we got the north and the south. We got the base from the east and the west. That's where we got the north and the south. We got the base from the east and the west. That's where we got the north and the south. We got the base from the east and the west. That's where we got the north and the south.
And several of the early Phoenician historians and Roman historians were convinced the Egyptians were the Atlanteans who could not go home because of the destruction of their land after their invasion of Athens, or attempt to invade Athens. The royal symbol of the Egyptians was the serpent coiled upon the forehead of the solar crown. And in the crowning of the Egyptian pharaoh, the crown of the north and south was always adorned by a coiled serpent placed directly in the center of the forehead above the nose. This symbol also comes to us from the great serpent balustrades of Angkor Wat. And on the Angkor Wat symbols and in many other parts of India, including the serpent of eternal time upon which Vishnu sleeps in the ancient Vishnu Puranic literature. We always have a serpent with 7 heads. Now, Plato tells us that the Atlantic continent was composed of 7 principal islands, over which ruled 7 princes. We've already learned of the 7 heads of Ravan, king of Lanka, the Indian Atlantis. We have also constant reference to this peculiar septenary, the septenary of creating gods at the dawn of things. And we have the 7-headed Naga. We have the mysterious symbol, which many have firm conviction must have originally represented deity in the ancient Atlantean rites. We also know that this serpent appears wherever we have the motion of the so-called Atlantean or Mongolian culture. We have the mysterious serpents of Gobi. We have the serpent in the symbolism of Tibet and China. We have the serpent gradually metamorphosed into the five-clawed dragon, the imperial symbol of China. We know that the dragon lore and the dragon symbol came more and more to be associated with the magician and the sorcerer. We also have the mysterious serpents of Latin America. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a good deity, not an evil one. And we have it among the Zunis and the Hopis, and even among the Navajo peoples. These symbolisms of the serpent we have generally associated with the serpent of evil, but even in the Bible we are told, "Be ye wise as serpents, and as harmless as doves." Every one of these groups of myths tell essentially the same origin story, that the peoples came from elsewhere, that they came with leaders who had led them from some previous location, that these leaders were responsible for the establishment of higher orders of culture in primitive areas. Thus, the natural or aboriginal peoples of these areas all insist that their cultures began with the advent of divine beings who came from remote places, from a long distance, from other lands. These remote beings did not resemble the people to whom they came. They wore different clothing. They spoke a different language. But in each case, they brought ideas. And from these ideas, the cultures of these local groups derived their impulse and their inspiration. There are evidences of the survival of Atlantean peoples, vestiges of peoples who have, for one reason or another, remained completely separate, have held on to their traditions, have regarded themselves as dedicated to a sacred destiny, and therefore regarding themselves also with a strange, deep, unchanging pride, a hauteur about themselves, the sense of being a chosen people, a people intended for some strange work of preserving, without loss, an ancient tradition. This chosen concept certainly moves the Aryas from northern Asia, for the word Aryan means the chosen, or the selected, or the set apart ones. But actually, we have much to support the belief that at a remote time, the progenitors of the Aryans, the Aryas as we know them, moved downward from the Trans-Himavat, across the great Indo-Gangetic plain, through the great channels cut by the Indus, the Ganges, and the Jumna, and down these great plains moved a wandering nomadic people. This people was ultimately to conquer the world. This people was to supply the races with which we are most commonly concerned today. From the early part of these migrations came the great Arya Hindu race. From it also came the Persian, the Iranian. From it came the Greek and Latin, also the Celtic, the Anglo-Saxon, the Teuton, and finally the polyglot, which we call the American. These peoples all belong to this great Arya migration. This migration, moving downward from Central Asia, did not move into an uninhabited world. When these peoples met the original inhabitants of India, they came upon the Dravidians, a very ancient stock. And here there in the world today, we also have ancient and mysterious stock, such as, for instance, the Basques and other culture groups, which cannot be traced directly either by racial structure or by language to any of the dominant cultures that we know today. These strange towers that look almost like Egyptian obelisks, except that they are circular, These towers belong to a kind of architecture which today is tied into the most elaborate folklore and legendary among a people who have become synonymous with folklore and legendary. The builders of the round towers of Ireland might have been Buddhist monks, for there is a record that Buddhist monks from Asia reached Ireland at a remote period. Asiatic migrants reached Ireland at a very ancient time. How long ago? We do not know. And as we mentioned earlier, the various schools of archaeology are in no common accord as to the primitive remains in Ireland and in the north of Scotland. The Druids at that time used Stonehenge because they regarded it as a monument created by the gods of previous ages.
While Gautama Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, allegedly reaching an enlightened state of spiritual awareness, or nirvana, nothing he said or did was really new, and this includes any symbolism associated with him. He was born an Aryan with blue eyes. His philosophy was well established for thousands of years by his family since the Pleistocene. Knowledge passed down through secret initiation since the Ice Age. Spiritual teachings practiced by the noble caste of every agricultural civilization. And at his time called the Aryan Path, he understood the occult meaning of the swastika, the serpent, and other ancient revered symbols that are now largely dismissed as superstition. Buddha regarded as a divine force of nature, which is subtly hidden at the heart of the inner mysteries of every major world religion. The original philosophy dealt with harnessing this natural and abundant energy, known to the Chinese as Qi and Prana to the Hindus. The Kabbalists and Freemasons call this universal energy light, learning to transmute their sexual energy into a creative force that can then be directed. Albert Pike, 33rd degree Freemason, said, and I quote, "There is in nature one most potent force, by means whereof a single man who could possess himself of it and should know how to direct it could revolutionize and change the face of the world."
We got the base from the east and the west. It's where we got the north and the south. We got the base from the east and the west. It's where we got the